12:30 by my clock, but my clock is Central Time, that's wrong. But by another clock, it's probably 1:30, which could be the time to start and talk about the JavaScript playbook. Okay, who here is a developer? Like, your primary role is to write code. I like that. So I like how I asked developer, and there's a few people raised their hand, and then writing code, more people. My official job title is double agent, right? So I'm not a developer, I'm a double agent. But, okay, I'm Zach. I work for TestDouble. We write Clojure, Rails, Ruby. Two aren't quite the same. Occasionally Java, Node. Our people have experience with those, and .NET and PHP and all the stacks, right? But we also write a lot of front-end JavaScript on purpose. And we find that purposefully and mindfully writing client-side code while following the same standards that we do on the server just makes our lives better. And that's why I wanted to talk at you all today, because I want to help you avoid some of the mistakes I made. So at any point, I think it's super, super important to think about who we're actually writing code for at any given point. If we don't think about that, if we don't think about who we're trying to please, then who are we going to please, right? So I like to think of it as having three masters. We've got the user. This is adding value. This is why we're drawing paychecks. Although adding values sounds kind of douchey in my opinion. Sorry if you're way into it. I like to think of it as writing code to change somebody's life. This is why I get up every day. It's making a dent in the universe, right? And if this were a perfect world, in my opinion, my version of a perfect world, this would be the only master I'd need to serve when I was writing code. I would always be able to just write code for the user. Sometimes I need to optimize. Often I do this prematurely because I'm a human. Ideally, the better Zach occasionally holds off on optimization until the last possible moment. And this is the greediest master. This is who we typically spend the most time trying to please, future maintainers. Because if we let the code just kind of go, then the longer a project goes, the slower and slower our velocity becomes, right? So of the three, the maintainer is by far the hardest. And most of what we're going to talk about today will be writing maintainable code, which I say that's code that's both flexible and readable. It needs to be readable. Somebody else needs to be able to look at the editor and see what the heck's going on. And it needs to be changeable, right? We need to be able to add features and fix bugs without the code base shattering. And ideally we'll be able to add features down the road at the same cost as those first few ones on a greenfield project. Ideally, right? This is really freaking tough. This is super, super hard. I think we're in trouble. I don't think we have the foggiest idea how to compute very well. This is Dr. Gerald Sussman. He's one of the academics I think is worth paying a lot of attention to. He's got 50 years of production experience. He's still writing code. In 1976, he invented a programming language called Scheme with Guy Steele Jr., who eventually went on to invent Java. So if you consider Java as the evil empire, then Guy Steele is Darth Vader, and Jerry here is Yoda, right? That's kind of like the Jedi version of computer science history. And he's a little bit not super tall, and Yoda works. Trust me, Yoda works. if only I had some means of showing an image of Dr. Sussman here. He still admits to coding himself into holes. And if Jerry doesn't have it figured out after 5 freaking decades, I can't stand up here and say, yeah, here's a thing I can do, and I can consistently get maintainable code every time. That's crap. I don't have this stuff figured out either. If any of you do, then please, by all means, come on up, because I'd love to see that presentation. So why is maintenance so expensive, right? I'm not actually asking, this is kind of more rhetorical, although happy if anybody wants to shout something out. I think one of the reasons is we don't always know ahead of time how expensive a change is going to be. A lot of times we have no concept of what that change is. My favorite horror story is say online retailer site that merges with another company, and suddenly we need a new user type, the distributor. And every single page needs to change a little bit depending on who's logged in. The checkout process is drastically different. And there's a third user type, right? Keep in mind, no concept of user type when the system was put together. And there's a third user type called a CSR that needs to act as a distributor sometimes and user type OG other times, just depending on various situations, right? If the code base wasn't meant for that at the beginning, at the very least, it's going to be expensive. It's probably going to look like a semi-truck T-boned subcompact car, right? I mean, if statements everywhere. I mean, we've all seen this code, right? We've all written this code. Well, I've written that code before, right? But we can make bets, right? And these bets, we typically talk about them in terms of best practices or principles or sometimes even laws, right? Like we can get our fancy computering hat on and say the law of Demeter, right? And it's a law, so it sounds like really authoritative. And it's a great heuristic, right? There's some like the open-close principle, super handy. If you actually go and read the text of open-close, I think, who here has actually heard open-close before? Okay, a fair number. I think I finally understood it for the first time 3 or 4 weeks ago. It takes a lot to get into the same headspace as the people who are writing about these bets to begin with. And the open-close principle, for example, I believe specifically references inheritance at some point. So I mean, the spirit of the open-close principle doesn't require it, but that original implementation does. So it's really hard to separate some of these bits of wisdom handed down from the past and apply them to what we're looking at any given point. But I'm probably most interested in those bets that deal with modularity. And would anybody like to define the word modular? Does anybody feel good about? Anybody? Legos, okay. I like Legos, that works. Legos, that's freaking perfect. So you look at a single Lego piece, right? And that's a thing on its own. And you can pick it up and you can put it in a different spot, and all the other Legos don't break when you, well, they could. That's an awful example, Dave. No.
It walks right into it.
Yeah, right into it every time. No, I mean, yeah, it's when a chunk of code, right? I don't want to say function or method or subroutine or coroutine or anything with some baggage, but a chunk of code, however many code inches. You've seen Harry Potter where they measure their term papers in inches of scrolls, right? So however many inches of code can run in isolation, like without any of the rest of the system in place. That's a modular piece of code. And I'm really interested in those principles, those bets that deal with modularity. Because I feel like of those bets that were handed down, these are the ones that seem to have the most bang for the buck in my limited experience, right? And it's about managing dependencies. It's about not depending on other things. Let me know if you want me to define anything else for you. So there's this bevy of stuff, another technical term, try to keep up, this bevy of stuff that our code depends on at any given point. Last year I was able to move a Backbone app over to Angular because my pair and I, we were experimenting with keeping our JavaScript objects isolated. And we had made this bet. It took us a little bit longer because we weren't practiced at writing it in this way. We weren't just shoving everything into Backbone-shaped buckets. We were mindfully building out our own object graph. And because we made that bet, when we decided that Backbone was really, really hard, let's go shopping and do Angular instead, we were able to just swap it over. If we just threw everything into Backbone-shaped buckets, it would still be a Backbone app. And it doesn't have to be about switching frameworks. It could be about updating a framework. Who's used a framework, client or server side, and had to update the version at some point? Okay. Keep your hands up. Now put your hand down if it's painless every time. Okay, one person. I need to talk to you. You've got stuff figured out. Maybe this is how you write your code, right? Because I find that if I try to keep the chunk, the hairy bits of my logic out of the framework provided buckets, my life just feels easier, especially during those updates. Other bits of your code, right? I mean, is it a Lego piece that is meaningful in isolation, or are there a bunch of direct references to other classes or functions? Every time you see $query, that's accessing a global variable. So we're asking the DOM, hey, what about this thing? And the closer we stick to the DOM and just constantly change and keep asking the DOM, keep asking it, that's exactly the same as just controlling your server-side code with global variables. Something most developers I know have kind of moved beyond. In fact, a lot of languages don't even really allow for that anymore. But I see it all the time on the client. We're allowed to take the best practices from the server and continue those better practices on the client as well. I mean, I/O. Do I need to be connected to the internet for me to execute this file? Do I have a dependency on the rest of the frickin' planet? Knowledge. If I'm invoking a function with 4 arguments, that's a lot of knowledge. Even if on paper there's no external dependencies and I'm injecting everything, like 4, 5, 6, or the option argument counts as more than 1. You're not fooling anybody. Just saying. Knowledge, implicit knowledge is also a dependency. So every dependency increases rigidity. That's true because the slide says it, and it's in text. But this isn't a silver bullet, right? I mean, if there's no dependencies anywhere, then we're not doing anything. Like at some point, code needs to talk to other parts of the code base. We need some I/O, otherwise we're not shipping anything but research papers. So it's a spectrum, right? Tests can enforce modularity if you're using a framework-provided testing tool. So in the front-end JavaScript world, the narrative usually goes Angular's testable because they provide specific testing tools. If I use the Angular testing tools, those tools aren't, my tests aren't going to enforce modularity. And that can be OK, right? The tests do other stuff. But just know that unless I'm actually extracting my code into somewhat neutral buckets, objects, functions, whatever, unless I'm doing that, then I'm getting a different set of feedback from the tests. Do you ever find it convenient that occasionally somebody will be standing up here on stage, maybe not this stage, but standing up on stage and describing your pain, the pain that you're feeling. And conveniently, they have a solution right here. And they've got a book and workshops and a consultancy that you can engage. And wow, isn't it such good luck that they happened along right at that time with this simple, perfect answer for your complex problem. If I ever say something works all the time, you should always do it, that is the moment you should stop listening to me and stop listening to anybody else. So flexibility is good. It's not free, but it's good. It helps prevent our code from being T-boned by our proverbial semi-truck made of user types, which I don't know what that would look like, but I'd like to find out. But if we can't read it, it's meaningless, right? We need to be able to communicate via code. It's because UML has failed us. We don't spec out, I'd say we don't. Does anybody spec out the fine-grained implementation with UML? I mean, it's cool if you do. I was about to say nobody does it, then I realized somebody might do it. And the reason why that doesn't work is the only language we have that's detailed enough to describe the fine-grained implementation details of a code base is the code base. Let me repeat that because it's kind of important. The only way we have to talk about code is through code. That's it. Therefore, code, in addition to executing and providing value, it must also meet the same requirements as natural language. If that doesn't bum you out, you're either not paying attention or you already know this and you drank it out of your memory. Right? This is a major constraint on our code. And I find that we don't necessarily spend a lot of time thinking about the readability. Luckily, other people have historically. I think this guy's GitHub username was Willie Shakes, right? I mean, it turns out he wrote some words that were super extendable over 4+ centuries, right? I don't think my code will last quite that long. And I've also been told that this joke is a Liskov violation. So some of you are awake. They're like, no, Zach, we were getting your jokes. They just weren't that funny. Thanks, appreciate that. I had something to say here. Hold on a second. I don't actually have notes. I'm just looking at a blank screen right now. He didn't know, Willie Shakes didn't know that what, in the 50s, the West Side Story would come along and kind of retell one of his stories. And it's been retold over and over again. It's been constantly dusted off and updated. We don't know ahead of time how readable our code is because those are future people, and their context is going to be different. The style of the code that we write changes, right? The libraries change, the humans change, our culture changes. But we can make bets, right? There's a set of bets we can make that will help anybody in any time. It'll make it better. Like, we can't guarantee it'll be ultra readable every time, but we've got some easy bets. And my favorite set of bets for readability are those that minimize contextual overhead. So that's the brain background noise, right? Like how hard you have to think about code like after you've gotten somewhat used to the code base. And things that kind of lead into this will include consistency. So who here has ever worked on a Backbone app, vanilla Backbone? Couple hands, could you raise them for real? I can't see. All right, I got some hands up. Can anybody tell me what the render method in a vanilla Backbone view does? Anybody? Nothing. Thank you, Brian. It does nothing. It's a no-op. So it's cool that vanilla Backbone provides this thing, this word that I can't think of for rendering. What's that? Hook. Hook works, yeah. This hint that, hey, maybe you should have a method called render in your views. And so in a Backbone app, it is the convention. Thank you, that's the word, Zach. Where was that? 30 seconds ago. You follow the convention of defining a render method. But from project to project, that render method is going to look different. And from view to view, the render method looks different. It's actually a little bit awful coming into a mature Backbone app because of that. It's a little bit rough. So consistency, naming consistency, functionality consistency, hobgoblin consistency, chunk size, right? How many code inches do you have to keep in your head at any given point to work effectively? If you grab a ticket or a story, are they called anything else other than tickets or stories? Does anybody have a word for like a job you do for the code? Okay, that's it. It's only called tickets and stories. Do I have to keep the whole universe in my brain to change the color of a button, right? Like is it? And this mirrors really closely to modularity, which I find interesting. Are the libraries that I'm choosing, are they likely to be around in a year or two? Or did I grab something with 3 commits, the last one from 8 years ago, right? We don't know for sure what's going to be in use in the future, but sometimes it's better maybe to go with something maybe a little more popular, but even if it's not what we'd choose if we were just thinking about ourselves, just to make sure that future people, it might be future us, they're able to work with something that's still actively updated. Once again, it's a guess. Hidden code. So imagine you're reading a book, right? With your eyes in your hands, right? Turning pages, each page top to bottom, and suddenly there's just a new proper noun. But it's cool, right? Because there's you can just look to the back and there's actually a cast of characters. So whenever there's a new proper noun, you can actually look up the definition or backstory about the person, right? And so that sounds awful to me. Does that sound great to anybody? Okay, that's when I come across a code base with a lot of mix-ins. That's what I kind of feel like, and I tend to come into a lot of other people's code bases. So maybe I'm just oversensitive. It's possible, but one of my triggers, my crazy triggers, is when I'm reading down a file and there's just a new method call, and I have no idea where the heck that came from, and not in the class, not in the superclass. I guess the superclass's cousin mixed that in, and so it's right. It kind of messes with the flow, and I'd like to think that having the reader in mind when they're reading through the file, so they're able to follow the narrative of your code. I think that's pretty important. Basic empathy, right? I mean, I hear a lot of discussion about very terse code and powerful functionality, and I don't necessarily hear a lot of talk about methodologies or features that makes code easier to read, which is funny considering that maintenance is the most expensive portion of most projects. At least that's my understanding. So I think that maybe all of our lives would be a little bit better if we focused on readability before writability, or at least projects that I come into. That'd be pretty cool. All right. I didn't used to do this part. I used to have kind of a more back and forth stream of consciousness dialogue with the audience rather than give any direct advice. But I'll go ahead and do this, and this could be the last time, I'm not sure. But so my context, right? The types of apps I tend to write. Who's ever heard of the best practice of mobile first? Have you ever heard the words mobile first? Okay, a couple people. Could you, hands again? Sorry, I didn't see you. Okay, so mobile first. I think that's reasonable advice for some web apps, right? The types of apps I typically write and that I love to write are those for, typically it's for a company, somebody that's trading products or goods, or goods or services for money, so a business, not necessarily a startup. And often I'm replacing an overgrown Excel spreadsheet or something that they've been locked into, right? And so it's almost always a crowd that's looking at the page on a desktop, and it's usually an older crowd, and so the things I'm going to say here would be different than if I was coming from Walmart Mobile. I think Walmart Labs, and I think I almost said Walmart, which isn't even a word. It's not even syllables, so it was kind of mumbling. So if I followed the advice of mobile first, that wouldn't make any freaking sense, because I think the app I'm working on right now, exactly 0 people have looked at it on what I would consider a mobile device. All right. Who knows what concat and minify is? Hands, could you get those elbows straight if you don't mind? Okay, so if you've got so historically we've just included script tags to individual files, and that's actually fine a lot of times, but taking all of the different JavaScript files, right? And first of all, having separate JavaScript files so you can break up your code in reasonable chunks. So you don't have too many code inches in one file. So breaking up the files, and then in production, on the client side, they just see one file, and in fact, it's just one line of code because it takes out all unnecessary white space, and it keeps it to the minimum possible size. And we've got a project called Lineman.js that's what it does. It's a build tool. If you've heard of Yeoman, it's sort of like that. There's a set of stuff, this set of modules it's built on called Grunt. Grunt's awful to configure. It is just awful. One of my bosses, although I can't call them bosses to their face, it's kind of hilarious. It's like the one test double rule because we're for real flat. So it's just like, yeah, just don't let them catch me. There's actually no finish to that sentence. So anyways, Lineman.js is pretty neat. Concat and min for free. Okay, who's heard of require.js? Elbows. Anybody? Okay, a few people. I think if you're new and you're curious about JavaScript, especially front-end JavaScript, you hear all of these best practices, all of these things that real developers do. God help me from the things real developers have to do to be considered a real developer. This makes things a lot more difficult. I would even call it complicated. I have yet to find a great way to test code that's using require.js. By definition, so require.js is a way to, it's a module system. So you'd think, so it's adding a module system to JavaScript, so it's making it more modular. Well, problem is, now all of your code has a dependency on require.js, and now all of the code is much harder to test. If you're new and you haven't used it yet, I would recommend skipping it. We don't use it internally. There's a lot of salty tears. And if you want to talk about it more later, feel free to pull me aside. Who's heard of Bower? A couple people? Elbows, I can't see you. Sorry, bright lights, thank you. Okay, so there's a tool out there. Okay, so there are server-side dependency frameworks. And in the Rails world, it's Bundler, and the Node world, it's NPM. Does .NET have something similar where you pull stuff down, or is it integrated with the editor? Like NuGet, something like that? I'm not, okay. And does that have anything to do with the stuff inside of a Snickers bar? Because I think I'm hungry. No, okay. So back, I guess, that way, if the slides are unaligned. So if you imagine your way that way, when we're talking about flexibility of code and all those really hard problems in computer science we haven't solved and stuff's like tough, and everybody has these problems. Bauer downloads a file for me. That's it. That's not an unsolved problem. I got it. Good. Thanks. Right? I mean, I can see things in the future being built on top of Bauer, but as it stands right now, I'm not enamored with it. So we tend not to use it internally. It looks promising, and maybe at least it's not actively trying to hurt me, right? This one might be neutral. Okay, I write a fair amount of JavaScript. I have recently had to admit to myself that I cannot write JavaScript in a consistent manner without a style guide, a written style guide to follow. So find one. It doesn't matter if you agree with everything. Write your own. Just have something written down, or write in a thing that compiles to JavaScript to take some of the pressure off you. Either one, but I think, especially if you're in a team, this becomes really important because it's consistency. I mean, that old quote is about patterns happen because of language failure, something like that. Like if you follow a pattern, you're doing that because the language doesn't provide that feature. JavaScript doesn't have classes, right? We have class patterns, and there's a bunch of ways to do that, right? And that's just one example. It's a lot of freedom, and I love it. Maybe it's too much freedom for me. Linting. I don't trust. JavaScript can fail in a bunch of different silent ways. It's kind of a dick, right? It just lets you fail and doesn't really let you know. I don't trust myself to write raw JavaScript and ship into production without linting it, and that's just static analysis to look for some obvious code arrangement pattern type things. Once again, technical terms. Am I going too fast? Just to flag it if there's an issue. Alternatively, something that compiles to linted JavaScript. If you have client-side routing, just use Ember. Sorry, I know there's a bunch of frameworks out there, but there's really not. There's two, right? So if you use client-side routing, use Ember, right? And client-side routing, that means the URL changes and something in JavaScript happens. A single page app, it typically is the phrase for it, right? Is the term for it. And also just learn Angular no matter what. As far as I'm concerned, it's the new jQuery. It's the new base means of interacting with the browser from JavaScript. Just these two texts right here. And if you're not going to do, I personally am not as big of a fan of client-side routing. So if I'm giving a long lead on my harness, right? I'm kind of picturing myself as an over-sugared kid, too many Choco Tacos, so chocolate smeared all over my face, chin strap helmet. Does that work for anybody? Okay, there we are. If only I had a way of displaying those images. Yeah, it'd be using Angular on the front end and probably having the HTTP server handle the routing. Were there too many T's in the HTTP? There could have been HTTP. Yeah, so Angular, it's not going away. It's got an amazing amount of traction. So Angular and Ember, there's not a lot of JavaScript frameworks. There's two, those two. You don't have to switch backends if you want a JavaScript. Typically, I hear it's almost always from .NET devs I hear who are interested in the mean stack, which, by the way, is awesome. If you're interested in a different backend, then look into that too. But you don't have to switch backends to start writing mindful, deliberate JavaScript. Okay, jQuery plugins. Another trigger for me. Okay, so a data grid, right? So who has anybody in here heard of data tables? It's a venerable. Yeah, I got a few. Yeah. There we are. It's great. I freaking love data tables, except for when I hate it. And there's this period of time between. I can calculate it. I bet this is constant time. You know, pulling data tables, it feels really good. Whoever the user is loves it because instant feature, right? Suddenly, table's sortable, filterable, pageable maybe. And then X time until I regret it really, really quick because there's a slight change requested that I just can't do because it's all inside of the black box, right? If there's a jQuery plugin black box that works really, really well, date pickers, I find, often work super well. I don't want to reinvent that. But if you're fighting a jQuery plugin, rip it out, replace it with something hand-built in Angular. In the long run, it will be less time. It will be less time. Whether or not you choose to test drive your code or to write tests at all, if you learn a TDD workflow in front-end JavaScript, I can guarantee that you will become much better at front-end JavaScript much more quickly. And then after you learn it, you can choose to discard it. Right? No, I'm not saying anybody should be forced to do something they don't think is optimal. But boy, learning how to test, because you not only have to figure out how the code works, you have to figure out how to get it to do its thing programmatically. And that's a much higher barrier. So recommend it for anybody who's not doing that. Also, ignore everything I just said. Like everything, right? That's my context. That's based on my past experiences. That's based on desktop apps used by people who are locked in, who don't have a choice to use somebody else's desktop app. That part's pretty sweet. I recommend that. Anybody who's into competition, sorry about your luck. Yeah, start from first principles. Educate yourselves and build your own best practices and ignore what anybody else has to say. But mobile first, screw you, mobile first. Nobody looks at my sites on a mobile browser, right? I mean, it's ridiculous. You're all professionals. You're all trained, specialized, amazing professionals. And if anybody tells you that you're doing this thing and you're an idiot, then screw them, right? And you got this. You're fine. And some of the JavaScript stuff, it's hard at first, but it's only hard. I mean, Rails was my first framework, and it took me a week to get that Hello World page up, writing it myself, not using any code generation. It took me 3 months to do the same thing with Backbone, right? It's easier now, but it is still much more difficult, to get going than a lot of server-side technologies. So if you're looking into JavaScript and you're having a hard time, then that means you're doing it right, because it's a little tough. And that's all I have. So I think I have a lot more time. I tend not to use the full session, though I've been talking at you for almost 40 minutes. I'm sorry about that. This has to be very tedious for you. Would any of you like to call bullshit on anything I just said? Fine, I can't be right about all that. That'd be sad. That means I don't learn. That means I don't get to learn anything today. Questions? I'll wait. All right, have a hand.
So I think now the trend is towards moving. Now you have this client-side MVC frameworks coming, right? All this is being moved to the client side, and server-side controllers and everything else are just fine-grained services. So what is your take on that?
Yeah. So I've got an unpopular opinion on that. I'm glad you asked, because I do actually really enjoy hearing myself speak. So that would be. So you want me to comment on people moving towards single-page apps where we're doing client-side routing and the server's taking care of an API, basically, like service, yeah. I think that's a great way to go in the use cases where that makes sense. So if you are building, RDO, is that how you pronounce RDO, or is it radio and it's just spelled funny? I'm not sure. But they have a music player. So if that was a traditional document-based website where they're serving a brand new page on each click, then that music player would go away, right? So they have a really strong use case for wanting to do client-side routing. Some mobile apps makes a ton of sense. I think HTTP servers are really good at handling URLs and giving you a page. That's my take. Like, that's another one of those problems that's, like, Tim Berners-Lee took care of that in '91. He solved it. It's not one of those unsolved computer science problems. No, we're good, URLs. You put in a thing, get a page back. Cool. A pattern I really like is rendering a lot of, maybe by default rendering and taking care of routing on the server, but maybe trying to stay more true to HTTP. And sure, we need a session because authentication. We need to be able to gate users. But beyond that, if there's other stuff going into the session, or if we are really concerned about what page they just came from, suddenly that's a very stateful handling of those URLs. And those could be areas you move into small, like, micro apps, inside of the framework. So you might be using MVC on the client and something like Angular on the front, where you throw the HTML element that tells Angular to do its thing, and you wire that up. And I really like that because, once again, it keeps the URLs on the server and the state in the JavaScript. And when I'm able to pull that off, I'm pretty happy. Please.
One other thing is, like, we built earlier traditional web applications.
Mm-hmm.
We built the markup using JSPs,
Mm-hmm.
servlets, and you used to emit out the markup, like the entire HTML page back to the client.
Okay.
Right. Now, the latest frameworks that are around,
Mm-hmm.
markup is totally handled by the client-side frameworks, right? Like you have Backbone or whatever JavaScript framework that you're talking about. Server side is the server is just providing the data.
Yeah. That's. So are you more interested in prototyping and fast development that way?
Yeah.
So with Backbone specifically, nothing's quick in Backbone. Don't use Backbone unless you already have a lot of Backbone code. But I wouldn't start anything greenfield in Backbone, because when I moved that app over, it was a factor of 5 of code reduction. 1/5 the code to do in Angular as it took in Backbone. But I think for prototyping, it's getting closer. It's still probably a little quicker to do it server side. And then when use cases come down the pike, and your assumptions, right? Because it's all about flexibility, because we're not psychic. And so if you think that, boy, this looks more like this looks more static, so I think we'll just take care of it on the server. Oh wait, boy, there's a lot of interactivity here. We'll move it to client side. So we'll just instead of rendering it here, we'll render the nav bar on the server, and then have an island of interactivity, like the guts of it, handled with something like Angular. Am I even answering your question, or is that kind of close? Okay. Sometimes I just talk about things I like to talk about, no matter what somebody asks me. So that works. Was there anybody else? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
What's your take on HTML5 web apps for mobile users versus writing a iOS app or an Android app?
Oh,
Much more rich web apps.
I don't. So the question is doing a HTML-based phone app versus a native app, and using the Android SDK or Objective-C, right? So I don't have I have opinions, but not any that I should share, because I've never done either one. So I would be actively making everybody stupider if I commented on it. Does anybody else have experience on building HTML5 mobile app versus native? Oh, you have one. Go ahead. So what do you think?
I mean, I think it's just makes sense if you're going to have one code base.
Okay, you might have to speak up to.
I think it makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I was just saying, now that we London that way.
Mm-hmm.
Because instead of having to have Android code, iOS code, and web code, you all have one code base. So if you make changes one, you don't have to make the same change. No, especially if you find a production defect. So if you look at the overall capability, overall speed market, it's far superior.
Oh, okay, cool. Did everybody hear that? So the argument for doing an HTML5 would be that you could use more of the code between different devices. And has that been your experience as well? Like you've been able to, and thumbs up, and so it sounds like it works pretty well for the set of use cases that you've seen at least, right? So.
Well, I mean, you can also go, if you have an existing web app and you convert it over to be responsive, and then all of a sudden you now basically wind up getting a mobile app out of it, where before it would have been a really different project.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. So because we're not psychic, then maybe your web app is actually an installed mobile app and you weren't even aware of it yet. Cool, very nice. So how much? So I'll do another 5 minutes or so of questions. Did I see another hand go up in the back? I might have hallucinated it. Oh, I see one there.
So if you had to start over,
Mm-hmm.
learning JavaScript again
Mm-hmm.
from the beginning,
From the beginning.
what would you do differently this time? What kind of course of study would you take? That kind of thing.
Okay. No, that's great. So I think I went about it in a really smart way. If I do say so myself, I wouldn't change a thing. Let me tell you how I did it. This would be a great time to burst into song if I could sing, but I don't. I like you all too much to just destroy your ears. So what I did, which worked really well for me, was I just kept overcommitting. So I recommend lying to people and telling them that you can deliver these features, even though you don't currently know how to, because at that point you don't have any choice. It's like the story is not that I've ever read The Art of War, but the tweet based on The Art of War I've read about like burning the boats or backing your army to the top of. I'm sure when you back an army up, it makes the beep beep noises, but back your army up to the top of the hill so you can't retreat, right? Put yourself into a position where you can't not learn it. And then for me, the other thing that I started doing with JavaScript I didn't do with previous languages was when I hit something I didn't understand, it was full stop until I understood that, and then I moved on. So JavaScript's this. That was like a month. I've actually stopped using this, which, by the way, is like the Abbott and Costello of programming. Yeah, you want to use this. No, don't use this. This is why we can't have nice things. So if you don't understand a thing, stop until you understand it, and agree to do something for money that involves JavaScript. And then everything else just takes care of itself. So yeah, not very specific, not actionable. And that's what I bring to the table. Cool. Also, there's a book called Secrets of the JavaScript Ninja. Title's unfortunate. It's probably the current best of breed basic JavaScript book out there. I don't know, Dave, is that your experience as well?
That book?
Yeah.
I've heard good things.
Oh.
I own a copy and haven't read a page of it.
Okay, Dave's illiterate, but he likes a picture.
I have a company card, so I can just buy books.
Yeah, he can buy books, right? Yeah, and like more. So Dave was able, despite not being able to read, he was able to write a book called Apprenticeship Patterns, and that's good for general, learning how to learn things. And so I was giving a talk at Dev Boot Camp where Dave's at. And I'm ripping on tech books in general, and then Dave said, "Hey, here's this tech book I wrote. Why don't you take this?" And yeah, I felt like an asshole right at that second, but it's a great book. I highly recommend it for a tech book, Was there anything else? Okay, I'm gonna call it down. I almost said call the ball as if this were Top Gun, which is not. This is a talk. But anyway, thank you so very much, and yeah, thanks.